He adjusted the collar of his uniform, the crisp fabric feeling foreign against his skin, and stood outside the imposing headquarters of Miller Enterprises. The global mining company, his heritage, loomed like a titan over the skyline. The glass facade reflected the morning sun, glimmering with the promise of a new day, yet Jonathan Miller felt a weight pressing down on him. Today was supposed to be a fresh start, his first day as a carkeeper, a role he had taken on under the guise of anonymity to understand better the workforce that kept the company running. But the nerves twisted in his stomach as he glanced at the busy employees bustling through the entrance. "Just blend in," he whispered, taking a deep breath to steady his racing heart. As he crossed the threshold, he was enveloped by the hum of activity. The reception area was a blend of polished marble floors and sleek furniture, with a large reception desk at the center, where a young woman with a bright smile was answering calls and greeting visitors. Jonathan felt a pang of envy for her ease. She seemed to belong in this world. He approached her, his heart thumping as he introduced himself. "Hi there, I'm Jonathan. I'm the new carkeeper," he said, forcing a smile. "Nice to meet you, Jonathan." "I'm Sarah," she replied, her voice warm and inviting. "It's great to have someone new around. You'll love it here, even if it can get a bit hectic." Jonathan nodded, grateful for her friendliness. "So, what's it like working here?" "Oh, it's a mix of excitement and chaos," Sarah laughed, her eyes sparkling. "We're a big family, but sometimes it feels more like a soap opera with all the drama. What about you? What made you want to work as a carkeeper?" "I guess I wanted to see things from a different perspective," Jonathan replied, choosing his words carefully. "I want to understand the people who keep this place running." Sarah leaned in closer, her voice lowering conspiratorially. "Let me tell you, it's not all glamorous. We do our best, but sometimes it feels like the higher-ups forget about us down here. It's all about profit and numbers for them." Jonathan's interest piqued. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "I've heard whispers about some new safety protocols they're trying to implement, but I'm not sure they're actually looking out for us. It's like they're more concerned about their image than our well-being." Jonathan's mind raced. He had heard vague references to safety issues from his father and the board, but this was the first time he was hearing it from someone on the ground. "That sounds serious. Do you think it could put people at risk?" "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised," Sarah said, her brow furrowing. "But you didn't hear it from me." "I won't say a word," he promised, though the tension in his chest grew heavier. He had come to understand the inner workings of Miller Enterprises, but he hadn't anticipated this level of concern from the employees. Just then, a commotion erupted in the hallway behind them. Jonathan turned to see two sharply dressed executives striding towards the conference room, their voices rising above the ambient noise. "I'm telling you, we can't afford to delay the implementation of the new protocols," one of them insisted, his tone clipped and urgent. "The board will not tolerate any setbacks." The other executive shook his head. "But if we rush this, we risk putting lives in danger. We have to think this through." Jonathan's curiosity piqued, and he exchanged a glance with Sarah, who looked equally intrigued. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those two are always at it. Something feels off about this whole situation." "Maybe we should keep an ear out," Jonathan suggested, his mind already whirring with possibilities. "Just be careful," Sarah warned. Concern etched on her face. "You never know who might be listening." Jonathan nodded, his resolve hardening. He would not only blend in, he would dig deeper. As the day unfolded, he settled into his role, moving through the parking garage where the cars were meticulously lined up. He wiped down the vehicles, enjoying the solitude of the garage compared to the bustling office above. Each car held a story, a connection to the people who worked in the building. The hum of the engines, the scent of gasoline, and the gentle clinking of tools became a comforting backdrop as he lost himself in the task. During a lull in the afternoon, Jonathan took a moment to gather his thoughts, leaning against the hood of a sleek SUV. His mind drifted back to the conversation with Sarah and the executives. Something was brewing beneath the polished surface of Miller Enterprises, and he could feel the undercurrents pulling him in. He was jolted from his reverie by the sound of footsteps approaching. Mark, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a friendly demeanor, walked in, a toolbox in tow. "Hey there, new guy. You getting the hang of things?" Mark asked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Yeah, it's not too bad," Jonathan replied, trying to sound casual. "Just trying to keep everything in order down here." Mark chuckled, a sound that felt genuine. "You'll learn. It's not just about fixing cars, it's about knowing the people and their stories. Everyone here has dreams, you know?" Jonathan nodded, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well, take Sarah, for instance," Mark began, leaning against a nearby vehicle. "She's got big plans. Wants to go back to school, study environmental science. She cares about the planet. But sometimes I wonder if she feels she can ever get out of this place." Jonathan felt a pang of empathy. "I can see how that would be tough." Mark's expression darkened momentarily. "Yeah, but it's not just her. A lot of us feel stuck. The higher-ups don't see us as people. We're just cogs in a machine." Jonathan's heart raced. He had come here to understand, and now he was hearing the very issues he hoped to address. "What do you think we can do about it?" he asked, his determination growing stronger. Mark shrugged, his eyes reflecting a mix of resignation and hope. "Sometimes it feels like there's not much we can do. But if we stand together, maybe we can make them listen." Jonathan absorbed Mark's words, a sense of purpose igniting within him. He had to find a way to bridge the gap between the executives and the employees, if only to protect those who had begun to share their lives with him. As the day wound down, Jonathan found himself reflecting on his mission. He had come to the company to uncover the truth and protect his sister Emily, who was oblivious to the brewing storm of corporate greed and danger. But now, with each conversation, he felt a growing sense of responsibility for those whose lives hung in the balance. "Hey, Jonathan," Sarah called from the reception area, breaking his thoughts. "Got a minute?" "Sure," he replied, walking over. "Just wanted to let you know that if you need anything, I'm here to help. We're all in this together, right?" "Definitely," he said, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I appreciate that, Sarah." As he returned to the garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something much larger than himself. Each day would bring new challenges. But he was ready to face them, not just as Jonathan Miller, the heir to a corporate empire, but as a man willing to stand up for those who believed in something bigger than themselves. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot, and Jonathan knew that whatever lay ahead, he was no longer just a spectator in his family's world. He was ready to become an active participant in the fight for truth and justice within Miller Enterprises, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Jonathan Miller stood in the dimly lit garage, the scent of motor oil and metal filling the air around him. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights above created a rhythmic backdrop as he meticulously wiped down the sleek exterior of a company car. The evening shift was winding down, and the last of the employees were trickling out of the building, their laughter and chatter gradually fading into the distance. He took a moment to allow the normalcy of the scene to wash over him, grateful for the ordinary task that momentarily masked his true identity. "Hey, Jonathan, you got that one shining like a diamond." Mark, the mechanic, called out from beneath the hood of a pickup truck. His tone was light, but Jonathan could sense the weariness that lingered just beneath the surface. Mark was in his late 30s, with grease-stained hands and a perpetually friendly demeanor, despite the burdens he carried. "Thanks, Mark. Just trying to fit in," Jonathan replied, forcing a smile. He had been working as a carkeeper for a week now, and while the disguise offered him a vantage point to observe the inner workings of the company, it also came with its own set of challenges. Jonathan was not accustomed to manual labor, and yet each wiped surface felt like another layer of his facade solidifying. Mark leaned against the truck, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "You know, it's not just about shining cars. This place has a history, and not all of it's pretty," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You ever hear about the old days? Back when the company was just starting out? Curiosity piqued. Jonathan straightened up, placing the cloth aside. I've heard bits and pieces, but I'd love to know more. What do you mean? Mark chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. Well, let me tell you. When I started here, the focus was on the people, workers like us. We were a family. But then, money got involved. Investors came in, and suddenly it was all about profits over safety. You wouldn't believe some of the corners they've cut. He paused, glancing toward the garage entrance, as if afraid someone might overhear. It's like they think they can bury the past. But I've seen things, Jonathan. Things I can't unsee. Like what? Jonathan pressed, sensing that Mark was on the verge of revealing something critical. Accidents that were swept under the rug. Safety protocols ignored. And all for what? A few extra bucks on the balance sheet. Mark's expression darkened, and Jonathan could see the weight of his words settling in the air between them. People lost their jobs, their lives, all because someone up top decided they weren't worth the cost. Jonathan's heart raced. This was the kind of information he needed, insight into the company's darker dealings that could potentially connect to the threats he sensed looming over his sister, Emily. Have you ever thought about going public with this? Telling someone who could actually do something? Mark laughed bitterly, shaking his head. And risk losing everything? You think anyone would believe me? They'd just label me a disgruntled employee. No, it's safer to keep my mouth shut. Besides, I've got mouths to feed. The conversation hung heavy in the air, and Jonathan felt a surge of empathy for the man before him. I get that, but sometimes silence makes us complicit. If you ever decide you want to speak up, I'll help you. Mark's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing his face. You're a good kid, Jonathan. Just be careful. This company doesn't take kindly to whistleblowers. Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of Mark's warning. I will. Thanks for sharing this, Mark. I know it's not easy. As he returned to his task, Jonathan's mind raced with thoughts of how to piece together the fragments of information he had gathered. He understood that Mark's insights were just the tip of the iceberg. With a new resolve, he continued cleaning the cars, his heart pounding with the gravity of the situation. Later that evening, as the last of the lights flickered off in the parking lot, Jonathan noticed something unusual. One of the vehicles, a black SUV, appeared to be parked haphazardly. Curiosity piqued. He approached it, squinting through the tinted windows. He opened the driver's side door to check if it was unlocked. It was. What the hell? He muttered under his breath, stepping inside. The interior was immaculate, but as he shifted in his seat, something caught his eye beneath the passenger side. A hidden compartment, slightly ajar. Jonathan's heart raced as he reached down, pulling it open to reveal a stack of documents, all marked with the company's logo. He flipped through the papers, his eyes widening as he read the bold title. Project Eclipse. The words sent a chill down his spine. It was a name he had never heard before, but the implications were clear. As he rifled through the documents, he found references to operational changes, safety protocols, and a series of alarming memos that hinted at something sinister. Why would they keep this hidden? He exclaimed softly, feeling a sense of urgency flash through him. The documents outlined plans that could potentially endanger workers in the name of profit. The more he read, the more he realized that Project Eclipse was not just a project. It was a blueprint for negligence. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He felt a presence behind him, a shadow lurking just outside the dim light of the garage. Jonathan's pulse quickened as he turned to see a figure standing at the entrance, tall, cloaked in darkness, watching him intently. Who's there? Jonathan called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The figure didn't respond but took a step forward, and Jonathan's instincts kicked in. He quickly stuffed the documents back into the compartment and slammed the door shut, his heart racing as he prepared to confront whoever was there. Just a car keeper, he said, attempting to sound casual. Need something? The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face he recognized. One of the executives from the upper management team, a man named Victor, known for his ruthless business tactics and cold demeanor. A wave of dread washed over Jonathan as he locked eyes with him. "What are you doing in here, Jonathan?" Victor asked, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying threat. "You shouldn't be in this part of the garage after hours." Jonathan swallowed hard, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Just cleaning up, sir. I didn't know this area was off limits." Victor's gaze narrowed, and for a moment, Jonathan felt as if the air had thickened with tension. "It's best you stick to your duties. We wouldn't want any accidents happening, would we?" "I'm just doing my job," Jonathan replied, forcing himself to meet Victor's gaze. "I'll be out of here in a minute." "Good. Just remember, some things are better left untouched." With that, Victor turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Jonathan standing alone in the garage, his heart still racing. As Jonathan stepped out of the car, he felt the weight of Victor's warning settle over him like a blanket. The documents he had discovered were more than just paperwork. They were a window into a world that was determined to keep its secrets buried. And now, he was entangled in something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. With his mind swirling, Jonathan knew he had to be cautious. He had stumbled upon something that could change everything, not just for him but for the employees he had come to care about. As he locked the garage door behind him, he glanced back one last time, the shadows of the night enveloping the building in a cloak of uncertainty. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but he was resolved to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Jonathan Miller sat on a worn leather stool in the dimly lit garage of his father's mining company headquarters, his heart racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. The steady hum of machinery surrounded him, but his mind was elsewhere, churning over the revelations from the past few days. He knew that uncovering the truth about Project Eclipse was paramount, not just for the sake of the employees, but also for the safety of his sister Emily. He glanced around the garage, his eyes landing on the shiny vehicles lined up like sentinels, each holding secrets of its own. "Hey, Jonathan," Sarah's bright voice broke through his thoughts. She had a knack for illuminating the darkness that often surrounded their work environment. She approached, her hair tied back in a practical bun, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Are you ready for lunch? We need to discuss our plan." Jonathan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "Yeah, let's go. I found some old archives in the storage room last night. I think they might help us understand what's going on with Project Eclipse." "Great. I've been thinking about how we can access the digital files too. If we can get into the main server, we might uncover more," Sarah suggested, leading the way to the small break room. As they walked, Jonathan couldn't help but admire her enthusiasm and dedication. She had quickly become more than just a colleague. She was an ally in a fight that felt increasingly dangerous. In the break room, they settled at a small table cluttered with half-eaten sandwiches and stale coffee. Jonathan pulled out a few papers he had printed off from the archives, laying them out like pieces of a puzzle. The details were disturbing: records of safety violations, equipment malfunctions, and complaints from workers that had been brushed aside. "Look at this," Jonathan said, pointing to a line in one of the documents. "They knew about the equipment failures months before the last accident and didn't take any action." Sarah leaned closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is huge, Jonathan. If we can prove that they ignored safety regulations, it could change everything, but we have to be careful. If anyone finds out we're digging into this—" "I know," Jonathan interrupted, his voice low. "But think about the employees. They deserve to know the truth. And Emily, I can't shake the feeling that she might be involved in something dangerous." Just as Sarah opened her mouth to respond, Jonathan's phone buzzed on the table, vibrating ominously. He picked it up, his heart sinking as he saw Emily's name flashing on the screen. He answered quickly, his voice laced with urgency. "Emily, are you okay?" "Jonathan, I need your help." Her voice came through, laced with panic. "I don't have much time. They're watching me. You have to listen. I think something bad is going to happen." What do you mean? Who's watching you? Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. The sense of dread he had been carrying suddenly intensified. It's about the company. I overheard something. They're planning something dangerous, Jonathan. And I think it has to do with Project Eclipse. Emily hastily explained. Where are you? I'll come get you. Jonathan urged, standing up and pacing the small room. Just meet me at the cafe down the street. Please, hurry. The call ended abruptly, leaving Jonathan clutching the phone, his mind racing. He exchanged a frantic glance with Sarah, who had gone pale. What was that about? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's in trouble. She knows something about Project Eclipse, and she's scared. I need to go to her, he said, instinctively moving toward the door. I'll come with you, Sarah insisted, following close behind. If we're going to confront whatever this is, we need to stick together. They hurried out of the building, the cool air hitting them like a splash of cold water. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as they made their way to the cafe. He couldn't shake the increasing sense of urgency that enveloped him. Emily sounded terrified, and he feared for her safety. Upon arriving at the cafe, Jonathan scanned the area, his eyes darting from one table to the next. He spotted Emily sitting alone in a corner booth, her hands nervously fidgeting with the edges of the tablecloth. Relief washed over him as he rushed to her side, followed closely by Sarah. Emily, Jonathan breathed, sliding into the booth across from her. What happened? Are you all right? Emily looked up, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. I'm fine, I'm scared, Jonathan. I overheard two executives talking about Project Eclipse. They mentioned a final phase and something about eliminating anyone who gets in their way. Jonathan felt his blood run cold. Eliminating? What do you mean? They didn't go into detail, but it sounded serious. They were talking about safety protocols and how they could cut costs by ignoring regulations. They even mentioned using the workers as a distraction, Emily said, her voice trembling. What do you mean, using the workers? Sarah interjected, her brow furrowing in concern. I think they're planning to stage an accident, something that will make it look like an unavoidable incident, but it will actually be a cover-up for their negligence, Emily explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. They're willing to put lives at risk just to protect their profits. Jonathan's mind raced as he absorbed her words. We've got to expose this. We can't let them go through with it, but we need evidence, something concrete. You're right, Emily said, her resolve hardening. But we have to be cautious. If they're watching me, they might be watching you too. We need a plan. As they discussed their next steps, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around the cafe, his instincts on high alert. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, and he felt the burden of responsibility for both Emily and the employees who could be in danger. Let's go back to the office, he suggested. We can use the network there to dig deeper into Project Eclipse. If we can get access to the internal communications, we might find something that confirms what you heard. As they stood to leave, Jonathan noticed a man in a dark suit at a nearby table, his eyes fixed intently on them. The man's face was partially obscured by a newspaper, but Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right. Follow my lead, he whispered to Sarah and Emily as they walked towards the exit. He could feel the man's gaze like a weight on his back, and the urgency of their situation deepened with every step. Once outside, Jonathan led them down a side street, making sure they weren't being followed. As they turned the corner, he could hear Sarah's voice behind him, low and urgent. Do you think he was one of them? She asked, glancing back nervously. I don't know, but we can't take any chances. We need to work quickly and quietly, Jonathan replied, his mind racing with ideas and possibilities. They were entering a dangerous game, one that could cost them dearly if they weren't careful. As they walked, Jonathan felt a new determination swell within him. They were fighting not only for their own safety, but for the safety of the workers and the truth that had long been buried beneath layers of greed and corruption. He would not let his family's legacy be a weapon against the innocent. He would uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything. "Let's do this," he said, glancing at Sarah and Emily, who nodded in unison, their expressions resolute. Together, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to confront the darkness that loomed over them. Jonathan stood in the dim light of the garage, the rhythmic sound of tools clanging and engines humming surrounding him. The usual warmth of camaraderie among the mechanics felt strained today, as if an invisible weight pressed down on everyone. He glanced over at Mark, who was hunched over a car, his expression more troubled than usual. Jonathan had grown to trust Mark. The man had shared countless stories about the company and its history, revealing a rich tapestry of pride and pain woven into its fabric. However, today, something was off. "Hey, Mark," Jonathan called out, stepping closer, wiping his hands on a rag. "You okay? You seemed a little distracted." Mark straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow, and forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just tired, I guess. You know how it is, long hours and all that." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "Come on, man. You can tell me if something's bothering you. We're in this together, right?" Mark hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "It's not that simple, John," he finally said, his voice low. "There are things happening that, well, they're not good." "What do you mean?" Jonathan pressed, sensing the urgency in Mark's tone. Mark took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I've been approached by someone from upper management. They want me to keep quiet about Project Eclipse. They threaten me if I don't comply." Jonathan's chest tightened. The mention of Project Eclipse sent a chill down his spine, the weight of the documents he had discovered earlier flashing in his mind. "Threatened how? What exactly did they say?" "They said if I don't keep my mouth shut, my job, my livelihood, it could all vanish just like that." Mark snapped his fingers for emphasis. "They know I have a family to support. I can't risk it." Jonathan felt a surge of anger. "You shouldn't have to live in fear like this. We need to do something about it." Mark shook his head vehemently. "And what do you suggest we do?" "Go up against the executives. They're powerful, John. You have no idea the lengths they'll go to protect their interests. But we can't let them get away with this," Jonathan argued, his heart racing. "If they're endangering lives." "Look, I get it. But I have to think about my family. I can't be the one to start a fight that could end badly for all of us," Mark replied, his voice strained. Jonathan felt a knot form in his stomach. He understood Mark's fear. He felt it too. But the thought of turning a blind eye to the potential harm looming over the workers was unbearable. "What about Emily?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if she's affected? I can't just stand by." At the mention of his sister's name, Mark's expression shifted. "You think they'd go after her?" he asked, alarm creeping into his voice. "I don't know, but I can't take that chance. We need to figure out a way to expose this," Jonathan insisted, his determination hardening. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, looking conflicted. "You're brave, John, but sometimes courage can lead to more trouble than it's worth. You need to be careful." Before Jonathan could respond, the garage door creaked open, and Sarah walked in, her face flushed from the cold outside. "Hey guys, what's going on? You look like you just saw a ghost." "Nothing," Jonathan said too quickly, throwing Mark a warning glance. "Just discussing some work stuff." Sarah raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Sure. If you say so. But I'm not buying it. You both look like you've been through the ringer." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Is it about Project Eclipse?" Jonathan and Mark exchanged glances, both surprised and relieved that Sarah was in the loop. "How did you know?" Jonathan asked, his curiosity piqued. "I overheard a conversation between two executives in the break room. They were talking about it in hushed tones, but I caught enough to realize it's serious," Sarah replied, her brow furrowing. "They mentioned something about securing their interests and no loose ends." It sounded ominous. "So it's worse than we thought," Mark muttered. Worse how? Jonathan asked, needing to know more. What did they say? Just that they're pushing forward with the project regardless of safety protocols. They think they can get away with it because they're untouchable. Sarah explained, her voice trembling slightly. I could feel the tension in the air. It's like they're preparing for something big. Jonathan's mind raced. This is exactly what we need to expose. If we can gather enough evidence, we can take it to the authorities. They'll destroy you, John, Mark interjected, worry etched on his face. You don't know what you're up against. I don't care. Jonathan shot back, frustration bubbling over. We can't let them harm anyone else. Not you, not Emily, not anyone. Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. I get it, Jonathan, but we have to be smart about this. We can't just charge in without a plan. Then let's make a plan, Jonathan said, his resolve hardening. We've got to protect each other. Mark hesitated, glancing between Jonathan and Sarah. Okay, but if we're doing this, we need to be careful. I can't afford to lose my job or my family. Neither can I, Jonathan replied, his voice steady. But I'd rather fight for what's right than stand by and do nothing. We owe it to the people who work here. With that, the three of them gathered around a workbench, their heads close together as they began to brainstorm ideas. Jonathan could feel the weight of the impending danger pressing down on them, but he also felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. If they worked together, they might just stand a chance. Hours passed as they mapped out a strategy. They discussed gathering evidence, reaching out to trusted colleagues, and documenting everything they could find on Project Eclipse. Jonathan felt a newfound energy coursing through him, fueled by the determination to protect those he cared about. Just as they wrapped up their discussion, the garage door swung open again, and a figure stepped inside. Jonathan's heart dropped as he recognized the imposing silhouette of one of the executives. It was Randall, a man known for his ruthless demeanor and cutthroat business tactics. What are you three doing here? Randall's voice boomed, sending a chill down Jonathan's spine. Shouldn't you be focused on your actual jobs? Jonathan exchanged a panicked glance with Sarah and Mark, his mind racing. Just cleaning up, he stammered, trying to sound casual. Cleaning up? Is that what you call it? Randall's eyes narrowed, and he stepped further into the garage, his gaze scanning the room as if searching for something amiss. I won't have you wasting company time. Get back to work, or I'll have to report you. As Randall turned to leave, Jonathan felt a surge of adrenaline. Wait, he called out, surprising himself. Can we talk? Randall paused, his back still turned. About what? About Project Eclipse, Jonathan said, his pulse racing. I think there are some serious concerns we need to address. Randall whipped around, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. You think you're in a position to question company projects? You're just a car keeper, remember? I may be a car keeper, but I care about the people who actually work here. Jonathan shot back, his voice steadier than he felt. Randall's lips curled into a sneer. You'd do well to remember your place. This isn't a game. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Jonathan felt his heart pound in his chest, but he stood tall, refusing to back down. I know enough to understand that people's lives are at stake. With a disdainful laugh, Randall stepped closer, invading Jonathan's personal space. You're playing a dangerous game, Miller. I suggest you back off before you find yourself in over your head. He turned on his heel and strode out of the garage, leaving an air of tension in his wake. Jonathan's heart raced as he processed Randall's warning. The threat was clear. He was being watched, and the stakes were higher than he had realized. But as he looked at Sarah and Mark, both of whom wore expressions of concern, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would not back down. He had to protect his sister, his friends, and everyone who worked under this shadowy cloud of corporate greed. Let's get to work, he said, determination lacing his voice. We have to move quickly. I won't let them silence us. Jonathan paced back and forth in the dimly lit garage, the echo of his footsteps mingling with the faint hum of machinery. The weight of the world pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had to act quickly to protect both Mark and Emily. Sarah was poring over the documents they had gathered, her brow furrowed in concentration. The glow from her phone illuminated her determined face as she scrolled through potential contacts who might help them. "Jonathan, we need to find a way to expose Project Eclipse and keep Mark safe from whoever threatened him," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "But we can't do it alone." "I know," Jonathan replied, running a hand through his hair. "But we have to be careful. If the executives find out what we're doing, they won't hesitate to silence us." Sarah nodded, her expression earnest. "I've been thinking, what if we gather enough evidence to confront them during the gala next week? It's a public event, and there will be plenty of eyes and ears around. If we can make a scene, we might just force them to listen." Jonathan's heart raced at the thought. The gala was an important event for the company, and his father would be there, mingling with the board members and investors. "It's risky," he warned. "But if we don't act, Emily could be in real danger." Just then, Mark entered the garage, his face pale and drawn. "I overheard something," he said, lowering his voice. "They're planning to use Emily as leverage against you, Jonathan. They know you're investigating Project Eclipse, and they're not going to let you threaten their plans." Jonathan clenched his fists, the anger boiling inside him. "We can't let that happen. We have to warn her." "We don't even know where she is," Sarah interjected, her eyes wide with concern. "If they've taken her, we need to be smart about this." Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I can help you. I know some of the employees who work closely with the executives. If we can get a message to them, they might have information on Emily's whereabouts." "Do you trust them?" Jonathan asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "More than I trust the people at the top," Mark replied firmly. "They're good people and they care about the workers. I'll reach out to them and see if they can provide any intel." "Okay," Jonathan said, looking between Mark and Sarah. "While you do that, I'll start gathering evidence. We need to have something concrete to confront them with at the gala." The trio spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah scoured through old company files, digging up anything related to Project Eclipse, while Mark discreetly contacted his colleagues to gather intel. Jonathan felt the pressure mounting. Every hour that passed without news of Emily made the anxiety gnaw at his insides. The night of the gala arrived, and the grand hall was adorned with elegant decorations, shimmering chandeliers casting a warm glow over the crowd. Jonathan, dressed in a tailored suit that felt both foreign and suffocating, scanned the room for familiar faces. He spotted his father, a figure of confidence and authority, laughing with a group of executives. The sight made Jonathan's stomach churn. "Remember, we're going to stick to the plan," Sarah reminded him as they maneuvered through the throng of guests. "Wait for the right moment to confront them." Jonathan nodded, his heart pounding. As the evening progressed, he positioned himself near the stage, where the CEO was about to give a speech. He felt the tension in the air, a mixture of excitement and dread. Just as the CEO stepped up to the microphone, Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He quickly glanced at the screen. A message from Mark. "I have a lead on Emily. Meet me in the back." The urgency in his stomach flared. "I need to go," he whispered to Sarah. "Be careful," she cautioned, watching him with concern as he slipped away from the crowd. Jonathan navigated through the crowded hall, his mind racing with thoughts of Emily. As he reached the back entrance, he found Mark waiting, his face etched with worry. "Did you find her?" Jonathan asked, breathless. "I did," Mark replied, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "She's being held at an old warehouse near the docks. I can show you the way, but we need to be quick. They might move her soon." "Let's go," Jonathan said without hesitation. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as they rushed out of the building and into the cool night air. The drive to the docks was a blur of streetlights and anxious thoughts, Jonathan's mind racing with possibilities. When they arrived at the warehouse, darkness loomed menacingly over the structure. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest, as they stepped out of the car, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. "How do we get in?" he asked, scanning the area for any signs of life. "There's a side entrance that's usually unlocked," Mark whispered, leading the way. "But we need to be quiet." They crept toward the entrance, Jonathan's pulse quickening with each step. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. "Emily," he called softly, hoping against hope that she would hear him. "Shh," Mark hissed, his eyes wide with concern. "We can't draw attention." They moved deeper into the warehouse, Jonathan's heart racing as he imagined Emily's frightened face. Suddenly, they heard a noise, a scuffle from a nearby room. Jonathan's instincts kicked in. "This way," he urged, and they hurried toward the sound. As they approached the door, Jonathan's hand trembled on the knob. He exchanged a glance with Mark, who nodded, his expression resolute. With a deep breath, Jonathan turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. Emily was bound to a chair, her eyes wide with fear, and two men stood over her, their faces obscured by shadows. "Get away from her," Jonathan shouted, adrenaline surging through him. The men turned, surprise and anger flashing across their faces. "You shouldn't have come here," one of them growled, reaching for something at his belt. "Run," Jonathan yelled to Emily, who struggled against her bonds. Mark lunged at one of the men and a scuffle ensued. Jonathan felt his heart race as he rushed to Emily's side, desperately trying to untie her. "Hold on, Em. I'm here," he reassured her, his fingers fumbling with the knots. "Jonathan, be careful," she cried, glancing at the chaos unfolding behind him. Just as he managed to free one of her hands, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse, and the lights flickered on, flooding the room with harsh illumination. The two men froze, realizing they were no longer hidden in the shadows. "Stop right there," a commanding voice boomed from the door. Jonathan turned to see a group of officers bursting into the room, guns drawn. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly overshadowed by confusion as he caught sight of the figures who had entered. "Jonathan Miller," one of the officers called out, his voice steady. "You're under arrest for trespassing and interference with a corporate investigation." "What?" Jonathan exclaimed, incredulity flooding his voice. "I'm trying to save my sister." But as he looked back at Emily, he suddenly recalled a conversation he had with Sarah earlier. The implications of their investigation and how deep the corruption ran. It was all connected. The panic surged within him, but there was no time to process it. "Mark, we have to get out of here," he yelled, grabbing Emily's shoulders and pulling her toward the door. The officers moved in closer, surrounding them. "Hands where we can see them," one warned, his eyes narrowed. As the tension escalated, Jonathan felt a mixture of fear and resolve. They had come too far to back down now, and amidst the chaos, he realized he might have one last chance to expose the truth. He turned to the officers, desperation in his voice. "You don't understand. They're involved in something much bigger than you realize. Project Eclipse, the safety violations. My sister is in danger." The lead officer hesitated, his brow furrowing. "We need to take you in for questioning, but if what you're saying is true, just trust me," Jonathan urged, his heart racing. "We need to expose them before it's too late." Just then, a familiar face emerged from the shadows. "Sarah." "Jonathan," she shouted, rushing toward them. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with evidence of the corrupt dealings they had uncovered together. "I have everything right here." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her, the tension thick in the air. Jonathan's heart soared with hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn this around. Jonathan stood in the dimly lit garage, the scent of oil and metal filling the air, his heart racing as he processed the revelation. The informant, the mysterious figure who had reached out to him with crucial information, was none other than his estranged mother. He could hardly believe it. Memories of her warm embrace and soft voice came flooding back. memories that had been buried under years of resentment and silence. She had left when he was a child, a casualty of the very corporate empire his father had built. Now, here they were, on opposite sides of a chasm that had been carved out by greed and corruption. "Jonathan, you need to listen to me," she had said, her voice trembling slightly over the phone. "I don't have much time. Your father is involved in something terrible. And Emily, she's in the middle of it." "What do you mean, Mom? Where is she?" Jonathan had demanded, his breath quickening. The urgency in her tone had set off alarm bells in his mind. "I can't tell you everything right now. Just meet me at the old warehouse by the docks. I can explain everything, but you have to hurry," she had insisted before abruptly hanging up. He glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away. With a resolute breath, Jonathan straightened his back and stepped out of the garage, the weight of his mission pressing down on his shoulders. He had to get to Emily before it was too late. As he drove through the city streets, memories of his childhood intertwined with his thoughts. He remembered his mother's laughter, the way she used to tell stories about the world beyond the confines of their opulent home. But those memories were tainted by the aftermath of her departure, a rift that had left scars on his family that never seemed to heal. Arriving at the warehouse, Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. The building loomed before him, a dilapidated structure that seemed to echo with whispers of the past. He parked the car and stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath his feet as he approached the entrance. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel an unease settling in the pit of his stomach. "Mom," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper as he stepped into the shadows. The interior was dimly lit, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the cavernous space. "Where are you?" "Jonathan, over here," a voice called from the far corner of the warehouse. He squinted into the darkness and rushed toward the sound, his heart racing with anticipation and dread. When he finally reached her, he saw her standing there, her silhouette almost ghostly in the low light. She looked older, wearier, but there was a fire in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "You came," she said, relief washing over her features. "Of course I came. You said Emily was in danger. What's going on, Mom?" Jonathan asked, urgency lacing his tone. She took a deep breath, glancing around as if ensuring they were alone. "I wish I could explain everything, but we don't have much time. Your father, he's been involved in illegal activities, deals that endanger lives. Emily got too close to the truth, and now he's using her as leverage." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "Inside the building. I overheard a conversation about her being held in one of the back rooms. If we don't act quickly, they might." Her voice trailed off, the implication hanging heavily in the air. "Stay here," he instructed, determination coursing through his veins. "I'll find her." Jonathan moved deeper into the warehouse, adrenaline fueling his movements. The shadows danced around him as he navigated through the maze of old crates and machinery. Every creak of the floorboard seemed to amplify his anxiety. He needed to find Emily and get out of there before it was too late. Suddenly he heard voices echoing from a nearby room. He pressed his back against the wall, straining to listen. "She knows too much," a gruff voice said. "We can't let her leave here alive." Jonathan's heart raced at the sound of the threat. He couldn't let anything happen to his sister. As quietly as possible, he inched closer to the door, trying to peer through the small window. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. Emily was tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant. "You think you can intimidate me?" she challenged, her voice steady. "This won't work. People will come for me. Not if we take care of you first," the man replied, a sinister smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Fury ignited within Jonathan. He couldn't wait any longer. He kicked the door open, the sound echoing through the room. "Get away from her," he shouted, stepping inside with a fierce resolve. The man whirled around, surprise flashing across his face. "What the?" Before he could finish, Jonathan lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. They wrestled for a moment, the man trying to throw Jonathan off, but he fought with every ounce of strength he had. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. All he could think about was Emily. "Jonathan!" she cried, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Be careful." With a swift movement, Jonathan managed to pin the man down, securing his arms behind his back. "You won't hurt her," he hissed, breathing heavily as he glanced back at Emily. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a little shaken," she replied, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pride. "But we need to get out of here. I overheard them talking about a shipment. A deal that's happening tonight. If we don't stop it, who knows how many lives could be at stake?" Jonathan nodded, determination setting in. "We'll expose this, together." He quickly untied her, relief flooding over him when she was finally free. As they made their way back toward the exit, Jonathan felt a sense of urgency pressing down on him. They had to act fast. But just as they reached the door, a figure stepped into their path. His father. "Jonathan, what are you doing here?" the man asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "You shouldn't be involved in this mess. Stay away from us." Jonathan shot back, positioning himself protectively in front of Emily. "This ends now. You can't keep hurting people for your profit." His father's expression hardened, and he took a step forward. "You don't understand the stakes, son. This is bigger than you think. If you interfere, you'll regret it." Jonathan felt a knot of fear tightening in his stomach, but he stood his ground. "I'd rather regret standing up for what's right than live in your shadow any longer." Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from an unknown number flashed ominously. "You've made a dangerous choice, Jonathan. This isn't over." His heart dropped as he looked back at his father, who wore a knowing smirk. "You see? You're already in over your head." With a sense of dread, Jonathan turned to Emily, determination hardening in his chest. "We need to go. Now." As they slipped past his father and out into the night, Jonathan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. The fight was far from over, and the danger was only just beginning.